Her district attorney husband returned from a business trip, bearing gifts for everyone in the house. Elaine Weston got a silk scarf, Olivia Weston a designer watch, even Clara Bennett the housekeeper a box of gourmet French cookies. Everyone, that is, except her. Is that all? Caleb Weston stared at her, his face cold. You want a divorce over something this trivial? She helped him out of his suit jacket, folding it carefully still warm from his body, and said quietly. It's more than that. For years of marriage, 3 of them he'd volunteered for out-of-state assignments, saying her college degree wasn't good enough for him. They'd married in a rush after an unexpected pregnancy, and when she lost the baby, he'd said it was because she hadn't been careful enough. She'd given up her dream of being a comic artist to be a stay-at-home wife. And he'd called her unworldly and said all she did was spend money. It's more than that. She gripped the cuff of his suit tightly. The wool fabric beneath her fingertips was soft and fine, carrying his usual cool cedar scent, mixed with the faint dust of travel. His 3-year out-of-state posting was finally over. He was home. Her heart beat dully in her chest as she summoned all her courage. It's more than that. Caleb looked down at her hand clutching his cuff, his expression completely neutral. He'd just showered and changed into a dark gray silk loungewear set, his posture elegant and upright. An invisible wall of distance pushed her 1,000 miles away. They stood in that enormous study, barely a step apart, yet separated by an ocean. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold and clear. Serena, this engagement was arranged between our families long ago. 4 years ago. You came to me of your own accord and said you'd marry me. Her body froze involuntarily at his words. Yes, she had been the one to come to him, at the lowest point of the Hale family's misfortunes. She'd clung to him like a drowning woman clutching a life raft. She unconsciously rubbed the fabric between her fingers, feeling the familiar rough spots. They were the thin calluses from years of holding a paintbrush, and the faint scars left by needle pricks when she'd sewn this very suit for him as a surprise. He didn't know. In 4 years, he'd never known anything about her. Perhaps her pale face moved him for a split second. Caleb sighed almost imperceptibly. I was in a hurry on this trip. Forgetting your gift was my mistake. There was a hint of something like comfort in his voice. Tomorrow, I'll have Liam Nolan order you the latest designer bag. Just tell him which brand you like. Her heart sank like a stone. So that's what he thought. That her strange behavior tonight was all because she hadn't gotten a gift from his trip. Her throat burned with unshed tears. She wanted to explain. To tell him she hadn't been waiting for a gift. That she'd never cared about things like that. But she opened her mouth and no sound came out. For years of silent marriage had worn away her ability to speak. Caleb's brow furrowed in impatience. That casual irritation of someone in power that could break her so easily. It's late. Go to bed. She stood frozen until the study door clicked softly shut behind him. That small sound was a sluice gate, locking all her emotions inside. Back in the master bedroom, the king-sized bed was a study in division. She lay on the very edge, her body rigid. The air was thick with oppressive silence, broken only by their quiet breathing. Suddenly, the mattress dipped beside her. Caleb rolled over, moving closer. His familiar cedar scent wrapped around her, sharp and invasive, filling her nostrils. Her body reacted before her brain, going completely stiff. Elaine's words from earlier echoed in her ears. Serena, it's about time you two had a baby. A sharp, stabbing pain suddenly lanced through her lower abdomen. Cold sweat broke out across her back. She curled into a ball, her nails digging deep into her palms. An arm stretched out above her. She closed her eyes, waiting for the familiar 4-year-old routine, but the expected wait never came. There was a soft click, and the last light on the nightstand went out. He pulled his hand back and turned over, re-establishing the distance between them. The suffocating cedar scent slowly faded. Her tense muscles finally relaxed, and the sharp pain subsided. In the darkness, she let out a long, shaky breath relief, followed by an even deeper wave of disappointment. She laughed silently at herself in the dark. Serena Hale. What exactly were you expecting? Caleb Weston was a golden boy. At 26, he'd passed the bar exam with the second highest score in the state. His future limitless. Every debutante in Boston would have killed to marry him. But in the end, he'd married her. An ordinary girl who was good for nothing but drawing. She remembered that rainy day 4 years ago. She'd stood before the grand gates of the Weston estate, clutching the thin piece of paper that read 6 weeks pregnant like a gambler holding her last chip. Caleb had said nothing for 3 full days after she'd told him. 3 days later, the proud man had finally bowed his head to the inconvenience she represented. He didn't love her. She'd known that from the first day of their marriage. For 4 years, she'd walked on eggshells, trying to be the perfect wife, trying to make up for forcing herself into his life. But it had all been for nothing. She owed him. She'd always owed him. 7 a.m. The sky was just beginning to lighten. Caleb returned from his morning run, a light sheen of sweat on his skin, carrying the crisp air of early spring. She took a clean towel from the hall closet and held it out to him. It's cold out. Go take a hot shower. Her voice was flat. He took the towel, pausing mid-wipe of his forehead. His deep eyes scanned her from head to toe. She was wearing a faded old sweatshirt from her college art department, the logo cracked and peeling. His eyes turned cold, his thin lips pressing into a hard line. I won't be home for dinner. I have a work function. He dropped the towel and walked toward the bathroom without another word. She was used to it. She bent down to pick up the towel, still warm from his body, to take it to the laundry. Clara Bennett came out of the kitchen carrying breakfast. When she saw the dark circles under Serena's eyes, she lowered her voice. Concerned. Mrs. Weston, you stayed up drawing again, didn't you? Now that Mr. Weston's home, you should get more sleep. Serena turned and put a finger to her lips. Clara. Clara nodded immediately and fell silent. As she walked toward the study, a thought suddenly occurred to her. She stopped dead in her tracks. She finally understood what that cold look from Caleb had meant. He thought she'd deliberately worn that old sweatshirt to protest not getting a gift yesterday. That she was making a silent statement, showing her displeasure. A wave of bitterness rose in her throat. So that's what he thought of her. A petty, calculating woman. And the saddest part was, she knew him well enough to know that's exactly what he'd think. She closed her eyes, forcing the bitterness down, and pushed open the study door. It was the only place in the entire Weston estate where she could find a moment of peace. She sat down and opened the household financial ledger. Shopping lists, utilities, social obligations. Pages and pages of numbers and entries, detailing every expense of the past 4 years. She held her pen, her fingers resting on the cool paper, and her chaotic thoughts slowly settled. Only here, dealing with these trivial but concrete things. Was she truly herself? Just as she finished checking the last entry and was about to close the ledger, the intercom rang. It was Arthur Carter, the head butler, his voice as steady as ever. Mrs. Weston, Mr. Nolan is here. Liam Nolan, Caleb's chief of staff. Her fingers tightened around the receiver. Arthur's voice continued. He said Mr. Weston sent him with something for you. She put down the receiver and sat quietly for a moment. Liam Nolan. The name was a stone dropped into her newly calm lake, sending ripples across the surface. She stood up and walked out of the study. The atmosphere in the living room was tense. Liam stood by the entrance in his immaculate dark suit, his expression as professional and restrained as ever. He was carrying a large shopping bag emblazoned with a logo she didn't recognize, but knew instantly was expensive. Clara and the other maids stood to the side, keeping their eyes down, but sneaking curious glances. There was sympathy in their looks, and curiosity, and a certain knowingness. Serena walked over calmly. Thank you for coming, Mr. Nolan. Liam nodded slightly and held out the shopping bag, his voice completely neutral. Mr. Weston asked me to bring this. He said it's compensation for yesterday. Compensation. A lump formed in her throat. She didn't reach for it. Clara. Take it please. Clara hurried forward and took the heavy bag. Serena saw her shoulders twitch almost imperceptibly when her fingers touched it. Thank you. Goodbye, Mr. Nolan. She dismissed him. Liam, who clearly didn't want to stay any longer than necessary, said a polite goodbye and turned to leave quickly. The door closed, shutting out the world. Clara held the bag, her face filled with indignation. Mrs. Weston, this is. Serena held up a hand, stopping her before she could say more. Put it in the back of the closet. I don't want to see it. She spoke softly. The others dispersed, leaving only Arthur Carter. He closed the study door, and the formal butler's mask slipped from his face, replaced by the gentle concern of an elder. Mrs. Weston. He handed her a file. What is this? She asked. A publisher saw your online comic series Childhood Days and wants to sign you for a print edition. Her hand froze in midair. After a few seconds, she let out a soft, almost self-deprecating laugh. So someone had been listening to the thoughts she'd never been able to say out loud. Also, Arthur paused, choosing his words carefully. I asked a friend back in Vermont to look into it. There's a good chance your brother Milo can transfer back to Boston within 6 months. Milo, back to Boston. The 3 words hit her like a thunderclap. For years, she'd married into the Weston family for him, given up her dreams, trapped herself in this gilded cage. She'd thought she and her brother would be separated forever, and now Arthur was telling her he could come home. A wave of overwhelming joy and bitterness crashed over her, making her entire body tingle. Arthur's words echoed in her head, drowning out everything else. The memories she'd buried for 4 years burst through the dam she'd built so carefully. She saw her father. He hadn't had much education, but he was the most optimistic man she'd ever known. Always saying people should be like sunflowers, always facing the light. He'd raised her and Milo alone with his carpentry skills, his rough hands able to carve the most delicate wooden combs. She remembered how he'd pulled a bloodied man from a burning car wreck. That man had been Caleb's father. It had created a tiny bond between their 2 families, a bond that had become her only lifeline. The scene shifted, her father lying in a white hospital bed, never to wake up again. A construction site collapse had taken him, and with him, the only light in their family. The sky had fallen. Her brother had been working in a factory out of state when a machine mangled his fingers, nearly crippling him. Their grandmother's health was failing fast, and the medical bills were piling up like an insurmountable mountain. She'd clutched her thin college diploma and gone from interview to interview in Boston, getting nowhere. The paintings she'd once been so proud of were worthless in the face of survival. Despair had pulled her down like a dark whirlpool, until that day, when she'd found an old business card in her father's wallet, with the Weston estate address on it. She'd made that call, trading the thin debt of gratitude her father had earned with his life, and her own precious 20 years, for a chance to keep her grandmother alive. It was a debt the Westons owed her father. Tears finally broke free, dripping one by one onto the dark mahogany desk. She bit her lip hard to keep from making a sound, but her throat was filled with the sound of a trapped animal. Mrs. Weston. Arthur's voice was soft, filled with sympathy. Actually, Mr. Weston has had me looking into Milo's transfer for years. She looked up suddenly, her eyes blurry with tears. He asked you to? Yes. Arthur handed her a tissue, his voice even lower. He doesn't talk much, but he's always cared about your family. He pulled a lot of strings to make this transfer happen. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed tight, then slowly released. Bitterness, hurt, and a tiny, confusing flicker of something sweet. So the thing she'd begged for with all her strength, he'd been quietly doing all along. She took the tissue and wiped her face roughly, her voice hoarse. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Arthur sighed, looking at her gently. You're a good girl. Mrs. Weston, stay with Mr. Weston, build a family, and things will get better. She looked down at the spilled coffee on the desk, a faint smile touching her lips. Better, maybe, but her life didn't have to be only that. She'd just finished cleaning the desk when Maggie, Elaine's personal maid, came to fetch her, saying Elaine had made her a tonic. Elaine Weston's room was filled with the strong scent of organic herbal tonic. She studied Serena for a moment, then pushed a cup of dark, thick liquid toward her. "You've looked pale these past few days. I had the kitchen make this tonic. Drink it while it's hot. It'll build up your strength." Serena took it and nodded obediently. "Thank you, Mom." Elaine twisted the jade bracelet on her wrist elegantly, her voice neutral. Caleb's at an age where all his friends have kids. James Bennett's son was calling him daddy on a video call the other day. Serena's fingers tightened around the spoon, her knuckles white. There it was. Elaine sighed, looking out the window as if talking to herself. If that incident hadn't happened all those years ago, Caleb would have married Luna Pierce. I'd probably be holding a grandchild by now. Luna Pierce. The name was a tiny needle, always pricking her when she least expected it. She stared down at her cup, drinking the bitter tonic in silence, a lump in her throat. In this house, she would always be an outsider, an accident who'd taken someone else's place. Back in the master bedroom, she finally felt like she could breathe again. She pulled back the curtains, letting the golden sunset flood the room and fall on her drawing desk. Only here could she breathe freely, if only for a little while. She spread out a sheet of professional watercolor paper, but her hand hovered over it, not moving. Marrying into the Weston family was supposed to be the best thing that ever happened to her. They were a good family. They treated her politely. She should have been grateful, but only she knew how cold that marriage really was. She remembered when they'd first gotten married. There hadn't been a drawing desk in this bedroom. Caleb's study was huge, with beautiful light and walls lined with books. She'd once asked him timidly if she could have a small corner of his study for her easel and paints. He'd been looking down at a file, but he'd looked up then. It was the first time she'd seen that cold expression on his face, like a calm lake freezing over in an instant. He'd looked at her, his voice completely without warmth. "The study is for work. Don't bring your things in there." Your things, her paintings, her brushes, her entire life and dream, were just things to him. From that day on, she never mentioned the study again. She'd moved all her art supplies into this bedroom, carving out a tiny, pitiful corner for herself in the space they were supposed to share. The sunset light slowly faded to gold. She picked up her brush, dipped it in ink, and was about to make the first stroke. Clara's voice drifted up from downstairs, cutting through the quiet. "Mrs. Weston, Mr. Weston's home." The ink from her brush blotted on the paper, leaving an ugly smudge. The door opened. Warm steam wrapped around her, carrying the sharp, clean scent of lemongrass body wash. Caleb walked in, his short hair still dripping, water running down his sharp jawline and disappearing into his collar. He walked straight toward her. She tensed instinctively, her fingers curling around the brush. His shadow fell over her and her drawing. A hand landed on her shoulder, its heat seeping through the thin fabric of her shirt. She froze. "When did you start drawing?" His voice was lazy from the shower, warm against her ear. His eyes were fixed on her unfinished painting. It was an autumn mountain scene, done in rich ochres and yellows, trying to capture the way the sunset turned the trees to fire. "You use color well." He sounded surprised, like he'd just discovered something new. "You've put a lot of work into this over the years." A wave of bitterness washed over her. Put a lot of work into it. In his eyes, her talent was just a hobby she'd picked up to pass the time, like Elaine's flower arranging and tea ceremonies. She didn't explain. She'd gotten used to it in 4 years. She just gave him a faint smile and looked down, pretending to tidy her supplies. But the hand on her shoulder didn't move. Caleb's gaze moved from the painting to the tiny corner she'd carved out for herself. The easel, the paints, the stacks of paper. It was cramped and crowded, just like her dreams. Trapped and messy. He seemed to remember something, his brow furrowing almost imperceptibly. "Why didn't you?" He stopped mid-sentence. She didn't have to look up to know what expression was on his face. Regret, probably, and a little embarrassment. He'd been about to ask why she didn't draw in the study. Then he'd remembered that the study was the one place she'd been forbidden to go. There hadn't been a drawing desk in this bedroom back then. She'd asked him once, full of hope, if she could have a small corner by the window in his study. She didn't need much space, just enough for her easel. He'd been leaning against the bed reading a file, and he'd looked up at her. It was the first time she'd seen that almost cruel coldness on his face. He'd looked at her, his voice completely without warmth. The study is for work. Don't bring your things in there. The air was still. The hand on her shoulder felt like a branding iron, burning through her skin. That unfinished sentence hung between them, thick with awkwardness. After a long moment, Caleb pulled his hand back. He turned and paced a few steps in front of her tiny drawing desk, then stopped. "I'm sorry." His voice was low, like he'd forced the words out. "I was wrong about you back then." Wrong about you. What a light word. But she remembered clearly. On their wedding night, he'd called her most precious possessions your things. That humiliation of being dismissed along with her dreams had been a thorn in her heart for 4 years. Now that thorn had been worn down, fused into her flesh. Hearing him apologize now didn't bring the relief she'd imagined. She didn't even feel hurt anymore. It just felt ridiculous. Too late. I'll have Arthur clear out a space in the study. You can move all your things in there. It has better light and more room. He looked at her, his eyes sincere in a way that felt like charity. "I'm fine right here." She spoke softly, her voice as calm as if she were talking about the weather. "It's more comfortable." Caleb's brow furrowed, clearly surprised by her refusal. "Do you have enough paint and paper? If not, I'll have Liam buy you the best there is." Once again, he tried to fix things with money. It was the only way he knew how. "What I have is fine," she said dismissively. He was silent for a moment, trying to find the right words. "Serena, you can just call me Caleb from now on." He'd said that before. "And those designer bags, they're just things. Don't worry about them." He looked at her, his tone patient, like a teacher instructing a slow student. She wanted to laugh. So in his eyes, she was still that shallow woman who'd been upset about a bag and a study. She suppressed the laugh and nodded obediently. "Okay, I understand." She was used to it. In 4 years of marriage, she'd gotten used to this unequal exchange. His eyes fell back on the comic draft on her desk. "The page for Snowy Night. This is really good." He meant it. Then, in that same matter-of-fact tone, "When you finish this, I'd like to keep the original." She didn't say anything. He didn't press her, just checked his watch. "It's late. Let's go to bed." He turned and walked toward the bed first. The overhead light had been turned off at some point, leaving only the dim yellow nightstand lamp. The air was filled with the scent of his cedar candle, ambiguous and oppressive. Caleb's breath was warm against her skin, his cedar scent wrapping around her. His hand just as hot as she remembered. Her body went rigid as a board. His lips touched hers, but she felt no warmth. Her mind drifted away, back to their wedding night 4 years ago. A strange room, a strange man. No kisses, no foreplay. Just searing pain and a cold command. "Be still." Afterward, he'd gone straight to the bathroom, leaving her alone on that huge bed, curled up like a fish dying on the shore. Now his touch was softer, even a little clumsy, tentative. But to her, it made no difference. It was like trading a dull knife for a slightly sharper one. The pain was still the same. In the haze, she heard him speak in her ear. "Serena, it's time we had a baby." Not a question, a statement. She stared up at the dim shadows on the ceiling and said nothing. "Including tonight." 4 years. 3 times. So that was why he'd been acting strange. 6 a.m. Her internal clock woke her precisely on time. She opened her eyes. The sky was just beginning to lighten. Caleb was still asleep beside her, his arm heavy around her waist like an unbreakable chain. She moved slightly, feeling the familiar ache in her body, but that sharp, constant pain that had been there for 4 years was gone. She froze for a moment. Even her body had learned to be numb. She held her breath and carefully lifted his arm off her. inch by inch. Then slipped out of bed as quietly as possible. Her legs gave way as soon as her feet touched the floor. She grabbed the bedpost to steady herself, then walked toward the closet. When she came out dressed, Clara was already waiting by the door. When she saw Serena, a flash of pity crossed her face, and she lowered her voice. "Mrs. Weston, you're up early. Breakfast is ready." Serena nodded and walked straight to Elaine's room. It was the rule. Every day, she had to report the menu and schedule to Elaine first. Elaine was tending to her expensive orchids on the balcony. She didn't turn around when she heard Serena's voice. "Have you finished the guest list for the annual spring garden party? Hurry up. Don't make a mess of it like you did the first year, embarrassing us in front of everyone." Her tone was flat, but her words cut like a knife. Serena stared down at her shoes and nodded. "Yes, Mom." Elaine finally turned around, glanced at her, then went back to her orchids, as if talking to herself. For years already, Serena's heart skipped a beat. She looked up at her. There was only a faint trace of nostalgia on Elaine's face. Then she frowned again. "Oh. And that tea party with Mrs. Bennet." She'd forgotten. She'd completely forgotten the promise she'd made to her 4 years ago. The promise Serena had kept with 4 years of her youth and all her dignity. A cold chill ran down her spine, from the soles of her feet to the top of her head. Just as well, when she left Elaine's room, that cold chill stayed with her all day. It wasn't until 8 o'clock that night that Caleb came out of the study. She'd just finished tidying the living room and was about to go back to her room. He called out to her, already standing on the balcony. "Come here a minute." She walked over and saw him holding her sketchbook, flipping through the pages. It was the only place she'd been able to breathe for 4 years. The flowers in the yard, the changing seasons outside the window, Clara napping in the kitchen. Her world had been that small. "You've been busy." He closed the sketchbook and handed it back to her, his voice unusually gentle. She took it, her fingers brushing his cool skin, and she flinched involuntarily. He didn't seem to notice. He looked out at the city lights in the distance and continued. "These are good, but..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your subject matter is a bit limited, Serena. You should try drawing something broader. The city. The lives of ordinary people." Her heart sank. Broader things. She stared down at the small world in her sketchbook. Her city. Her ordinary lives. We're all inside this house. She didn't answer. She couldn't answer. He didn't seem to expect one anyway. He changed the subject. "James Bennet is coming over later. Make some coffee." James Bennet, his closest college friend, and the one who'd always looked down on her the most. She nodded and turned to go into the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the small space, but she felt like she was suffocating. She carried the tray to the study door. It was slightly ajar, and James's loud voice drifted out. "Caleb, man. I heard Luna Pierce got divorced a while back. She's not doing too well. If only you'd..." Her feet froze to the floor. The edge of the tray dug into her palm. Painful. There was a moment of silence. Then Caleb's calm voice. "Marriage is a responsibility. Responsibility. Not love. Not affection. Just 2 cold words." James scoffed, his contempt obvious. "Responsibility. What does she give you? A regular art student? How does she help your career? Look at Luna's father." Her breath caught in her throat. She could barely stand. She wanted to turn and run, but her feet were rooted to the spot. She had to know. What did Caleb really think of her? Then she heard his voice, clear and calm, like a judge reading a verdict that had nothing to do with him. "She comes from a modest background, but she's genuinely talented at drawing." Her heart skipped a beat at that unexpected praise. Maybe. But his next words shattered that tiny spark of hope like a hammer. "It's just her character. It's a bit flawed. After all, women tend to be vain. After all, women tend to be vain." Caleb's voice was completely neutral. She stood there holding the tray, the coffee she'd made for him feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Her knuckles were white from gripping it so hard. She didn't burst in and confront him. She didn't drop the tray in a fit of rage. She just turned around and walked slowly back to the master bedroom. She closed the door behind her and set the tray down on the table. Steam rose from the coffee, blurring her vision. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, pale, bloodless, utterly unrecognizable. A lump was stuck in her throat, making it impossible to breathe. She clutched her chest and gasped for air, but all she could breathe in was cold, empty air. For years of her life, and all she got was flawed character and vain. Tears finally rolled down her cheeks, hot and heavy, falling onto the back of her hand. Her life, her pride, the things she'd fought so hard to hold on to, had all been a joke. "Mrs. Weston, are you okay?" Clara pushed open the door and dropped the towel she was holding when she saw her. She hurried over and touched Serena's face. "Oh my God, you're freezing." Serena grabbed her hand, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. In that moment, everything became clear. She couldn't go on like this. If she stayed here any longer, she would die. The tears stopped as suddenly as they'd started. She looked up at Clara, her voice hoarse but completely calm. "Clara, get the envelope from the bottom drawer of the nightstand, please." Clara looked confused, but she did as she was told. It was a brown manila envelope, slightly worn. Serena took it and laid it on the dresser, smoothing out the creases carefully. She'd prepared this a year ago. She'd naively thought she'd never have to use it. I don't know how long passed before the door handle turned and Caleb walked in. He took off his suit jacket and frowned when he saw her still sitting there. "Why aren't you in bed?" His tone was the same as always, distant. She didn't answer. She just stood up and pushed the envelope toward him. Caleb looked at the envelope, then at her, his eyes curious. He opened it and pulled out the papers inside. When he saw the words divorce agreement, his usual composed expression finally cracked. He looked up at her sharply, his eyes like knives. "Serena, what is this nonsense?" She met his gaze. Those deep eyes she'd once been so fascinated by were now nothing but ice. She smiled, very softly. Then she said it, clearly and distinctly. "I want a divorce." Her voice was quiet, but it hit him like a stone dropped into a still lake, sending waves crashing through his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Caleb's voice was cold as ice. The aura of authority he carried with him everywhere filled the room instantly. Once, that would have been enough to make her crumble. But now, she just calmly took the agreement from his hand, flipped to the last page, and pointed to her signature. It was neat, the elegant, precise script she'd practiced for 20 years. "Serena Hale. Look, I already signed it." She even smiled at him. Just now, Caleb stared at that signature like he could burn a hole through it. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with emotions she couldn't read: shock, anger. "When did you prepare this?" His voice was low, every word forced through gritted teeth. She met his gaze calmly. "A year ago." Caleb's pupils contracted sharply. The air seemed to freeze. She stared down at her hands, her voice completely flat. "4 years ago. My father was dying. Milo was hurt, and I had nowhere else to turn. I came to you begging. I know I came between you and Luna, that you never got to be with her. And you've resented me for it ever since. This agreement is the closure you've always deserved." She'd thought these words would make him see she was being reasonable, that she was doing this for him. But Caleb laughed like she'd just told the funniest joke in the world. "Closure." He took a step toward her, his tall shadow swallowing her whole. "Serena, did you forget? I agreed to this marriage. I don't back out of my decisions. What makes you think I need closure from you?" He didn't understand. He would never understand. For 4 years, she'd lived like a prisoner with a guilty conscience, trying to repay this debt with her obedience and her kindness. Every late night he came home, every time he dismissed her art, every time he laughed with his friends while she sat alone in the corner, all those tiny, sharp thorns had pierced her heart 1,000 times. She'd thought it was because she wasn't good enough, until today, she'd finally realized. It wasn't her. She just wasn't worthy. A fire burned in her chest, painful and hot. For years of pent-up hurt broke through all her defenses. Tears rolled down her cheeks without warning, blurring her vision. Caleb. She said his full name for the first time, her voice shaking. I'm so tired. So tired. Caleb clearly hadn't expected her to break down like this. He reached out a hand as if to touch her, but it froze in midair. The anger and sharpness faded from his face, replaced by a rare look of confusion and irritation. Tired of what? He frowned. Like he'd finally found the problem. Is it the housework? I'll have Arthur hire 2 more maids tomorrow. Her heart sank. She looked at him desperately, shaking her head slowly. His irritation grew, like he'd completely run out of patience. Then what is it? Because I didn't bring you a gift. He pulled his wallet out of his pocket and handed her a Nolamet black credit card. Take this. Buy whatever you want. Consider it compensation. Compensation. So in his eyes, all her hurt, all her exhaustion, all her despair could be fixed with a gift, a credit card. The tears stopped. When your heart is dead, you don't feel pain anymore. She looked at him, her eyes as calm as a still lake. Caleb, money can't fix what's broken between us. If you're worried about your career, I'll wait. We can keep it quiet until you're ready. And if you still won't agree. She took a deep breath and said the words she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. I'll waive all claims to marital property and walk away with nothing. Caleb's hand holding the black card froze in midair. He stared at her for a long time, like he was trying to see into her soul. Finally, he said nothing. He just slammed the black card onto the floor, turned, and stormed out the door. Bam! The huge slam shook the entire house. The heavy stone that had been pressing on her chest for 4 years shattered into a million pieces. She let out a long, silent breath, feeling lighter than she had in years. The front door hadn't quite closed when Elaine came running out. Wearing an elegant silk robe, her face set in that familiar expression of disdain. She glanced at Serena, then at the black card lying on the floor, and her brow furrowed immediately. What's all the racket this early in the morning? You've got Caleb furious. Serena bent down, picked up the signed agreement, and held it out to her calmly. Mom, we're getting a divorce. Elaine froze for half a second, then let out a snort of laughter, like she'd just heard the most ridiculous thing in the world. Divorce. Serena. Have you lost your mind? What will you live on without the Westons? Serena looked at her, her eyes completely calm. Mom, I'm doing this for Caleb's sake. He's in a position of power now, with a bright future ahead of him. He needs a wife with a better education and a more prominent family to help his career. She paused, her voice sincere. A daughter-in-law like me, who married above her station, will only hold him back and embarrass you in front of your friends. Me leaving is best for everyone. Elaine was speechless. She'd always cared most about status and appearances. And Serena's words had hit her exactly where it hurt. She couldn't think of a single thing to say in reply. A cold figure appeared in the doorway, having come back without a sound. Caleb's face was darker than before. His eyes like ice daggers pointed straight at Serena. Mom, go back to your room. His voice left no room for argument. Elaine opened her mouth, but in the end she didn't dare say anything, and turned to leave, looking annoyed. The huge living room was silent except for the two of them. Caleb walked slowly over and sat down on the couch opposite her, his presence overwhelming. He stared at her like he was interrogating a criminal. How do you plan to live without me? He still had that same arrogant look, completely convinced she couldn't survive without him. She laughed. Caleb, I don't want any of your money. I have my own independent comic studio. It's been running for a year, and it makes a steady income. She watched his face go completely rigid as she continued. I signed a contract with a well-known editor, and the royalties are more than enough to live on. The silence was deafening. She could see his hand on his knee, his knuckles turning white as he clenched it into a fist, the veins standing out on the back of his hand. The control he'd always prided himself on had completely shattered. She looked away, her voice softening. Besides, Grandma's getting old. I want to go back to Vermont and be with her. At the mention of her grandmother, Caleb's tight jaw relaxed slightly, and a flicker of regret crossed his face. Grandma's health. I should have brought her here sooner. His voice was rough, filled with belated guilt. She shook her head. No, she's used to Vermont. She doesn't like the noise of the city. She said nothing more, just sat quietly watching him, watching the shock, the confusion, the disbelief in his eyes. After a long time, he finally found his voice, every word a struggle. You planned this all along, didn't you? Faced with his cold anger, she didn't even blink. Yes, that one word, soft as a feather, hit him like a sledgehammer. She saw his pupils dilate sharply. She didn't want to argue with him anymore. She walked over to the coffee table. The handover won't take long. She spread out the folders she'd prepared one by one, her voice completely steady. These are the warranty cards and manuals for all the appliances, sorted by brand and purchase date. These are the contact information and schedules for the gardener, pool maintenance, and family doctor. These are your dry cleaners membership cards and the prepaid cards for your favorite restaurants. Everything was organized perfectly, clear and easy to understand. She hadn't been a useless canary in a gilded cage for 4 years. Caleb stared at those files, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. Thank you for everything these past years. A thank you that was 4 years too late. But she didn't need it anymore. She ignored him and pulled out 3 more ledgers from her bag. Now let's go over the finances. She opened the first one. Household expenses. The second. Utilities and social obligations. The third. His personal expenses. Every entry was clear, with receipts attached. Arthur Carter stared, wide-eyed, and couldn't help but whisper in admiration. Mrs. Weston. This is incredible. She flipped to a certain page, her finger pausing. It was from their first year of marriage, when she'd been scammed out of a large sum of money by an unlicensed luxury personal shopper. Caleb had just looked at her coldly and said, "You can't even handle something this simple. Is your brain just for decoration?" From that day on, she'd thrown herself into learning about finance, reading every book she could find. She pushed the ledgers across the table to Caleb. 4 years. Total income. 13.27 million. Total expenses. 11.08 million. The balance of 2.19 million is in this card. You can have a professional accountant check it. If there's even a cent missing, Enough. Caleb slammed his hand down on the table, cutting her off, the veins standing out on his hand. His hand was shaking. She looked up at him, meeting his angry eyes directly. What? District Attorney Weston. Afraid I embezzled money from the Weston family? Or have you always thought I was just a vain woman who'd sell anything for money? She stood up and turned away from him. She walked over to Arthur and the other maids, who were standing to the side with tears in their eyes. Mr. Carter, thank you for everything these past years. Take care of yourselves. They all started begging her to stay, their voices filled with genuine sadness. She smiled and shook her head, then walked back to the coffee table and poured herself a glass of water. She raised the glass toward Caleb, who was still sitting there, his face white. I'll drink this water in place of wine. Caleb, thank you for helping Milo get his transfer. I won't forget it. She drank the water in one gulp and set the glass down gently on the table, making a soft clinking sound. That sound was a period at the end of a sentence. You already signed the divorce agreement. My lawyer will file it with the court as soon as possible. She picked up her bag and didn't give him a chance to say anything else. She turned and walked toward the door, not looking back at him even once. Sunlight streamed through the huge floor-to-ceiling windows, cut into bright stripes by the blinds, laying a golden carpet at her feet. She walked forward, light and sure, just as her hand was about to touch the doorknob. There was a soft thud behind her, the sound of a knee hitting the cold marble floor. She turned around in surprise. Layla, the young maid, had dropped to her knees in a deep, grateful bow in front of her. She looked up, her face streaked with tears. a mixture of gratitude and sadness. Mrs. Weston. Her voice echoed through the empty living room, thick with tears. Thank you. Thank you for lending me the money for my mom's surgery 2 years ago. If it weren't for you, she'd be dead. We all know how kind you are. Please don't leave. She bowed deeply, her shoulders shaking. Arthur and the other maids gathered around, their eyes all red, wanting to say something but not knowing how. So the kindness she'd thought no one had noticed had been remembered all along. A hard corner of her heart suddenly softened, and her eyes filled with tears. She hurried over and helped Lila up. Please. Get up. It's all in the past. Her voice was rough, but softer than it had been in years. She wiped Lila's tears and looked around at all the people she'd lived with for 4 years. Take care of yourselves. She paused, then added. And take care of Pudding for me. She's picky, she only eats grain-free premium cat food. Pudding was the stray cat she'd rescued 3 years ago. The only warmth in that cold house. Her eyes swept over the crowd and landed on Clara, who was hiding in the shadow of the doorway, her shoulders shaking, biting her lip hard to keep from crying. Serena gave her a helpless smile. She couldn't take Clara with her. She couldn't take Pudding. None of this belonged to her. Finally, her eyes fell on the man standing there. Caleb was still in the same spot, like a statue with its soul ripped out. His face a mask of confusion and shock she'd never seen before. He looked at her, at all the maids crying for her, and the storm in his eyes seemed to shatter completely, leaving only incomprehensible chaos. For years, this was the first time she'd really seen him. Not the brilliant district attorney, not the heir to the Weston fortune, just a sad man, blinded by his own privilege and prejudice. She looked away, no longer hesitating, pulled open the door, and walked out without looking back. The taxi sped down the highway. The towering skyscrapers of Boston gradually gave way to rolling green hills. The noise of the city was left behind in the wind, and the air began to smell of dirt and plants. She rolled down the window, letting the damp wind blow against her face, drying the last of her tears. A 4-year nightmare was finally over. The car stopped in front of a small cottage with a yard in the Vermont countryside. In the distance, she saw a small figure leaning against the gate, craning her neck anxiously. It was Grandma. She pushed open the car door and ran toward her, almost stumbling. Grandma. Grandma opened her arms and pulled her close, her thin but warm arms wrapping around her tightly, her old hand stroking her hair gently. You're home. You're finally home. Serena, you're home now. She buried her face in Grandma's shirt, which smelled like sunshine, breathed in the scent of jasmine from the yard, and listened to the distant barking of a dog. Her heart finally felt at peace. The tired bird had come home to its nest. Life in the cottage was like taking a life that had been soaked in disinfectant and hanging it out in the sun to dry. The yard was small, but Grandma had filled it with life. The old storage shed covered in English ivy in the corner had been converted into her art studio. Sunlight streamed through the huge wooden windows, falling on the easel, and the air smelled of grass and damp earth. She no longer had to huddle in that tiny corner of the Weston bedroom, catching light through a small window. One afternoon, she and Grandma were working in the yard. Grandma stopped by the pear tree in the center, her wrinkled hand gently touching the rough bark. Serena, I planted this tree the year you married into the Weston family. Serena froze. Grandma's eyes were distant, as if looking through the tree at the thin, determined girl who'd left 4 years ago. There's an old local legend that a guardian spirit watches over the pear trees in our yards. I made a deal with her. Grandma smiled, her eyes crinkling like dried orange peel. I traded my peaceful nights for yours, so you'd always be safe and free. Serena's nose burned, and tears rolled down her cheeks without warning. So in all the time she hadn't been there, Grandma had been praying for her in her own simple way. She threw herself into Grandma's arms, like a lost child who'd finally found her way home. Grandma, I'm so sorry. Grandma just patted her back, saying over and over, silly girl, home is here. You have nothing to be sorry for. Dinner was simple but warm, baked salmon with herbs, sautéed spinach with garlic, and buttery mashed potatoes that filled the house with their rich aroma. She and Grandma sat under the warm yellow light. Grandma kept putting food on her plate, chattering about how she was going to plant roses and peonies in the empty spots in the yard. Serena looked at her. And the rough, worn parts of her heart that had been damaged by 4 years of marriage slowly healed. Here, she wasn't Mrs. Weston. She wasn't the perfect wife who had to be on her best behavior at all times. She was just Serena, her inspiration, which had been trapped for 4 years. Burst free like a wild animal, pouring onto the paper. Her comic art had no more boundaries. In the evenings, she liked to go for walks in the nearby park. The sunset painted the country roads gold, and the air was filled with the sound of birds returning to their nests and the scent of unknown flowers. She felt completely relaxed, a lightness in her heart she hadn't felt in years. But when she walked back to the cottage that evening, she stopped dead in her tracks. A black luxury car was parked at the gate, looking completely out of place. Its sleek lines and expensive logo were like a steel beast lying in wait in the countryside, clashing with everything around it. It was Caleb's car. Her heart sank. Before she could react, the cottage door opened. A familiar figure ran out. Happily it was Clara. Serena, you're back. Her face was lit up with genuine joy, like a puppy seeing its owner. Seeing Clara, Serena's tense shoulders relaxed slightly, and a smile tugged at her lips. But the next second, the car door opened, and a tall figure got out of the driver's seat. Caleb. He was wearing a well-tailored dark gray casual suit, less sharp than usual, softer around the edges. He looked at her, and there was none of the usual judgment or coldness in his eyes. There was even something hopeful, something she couldn't quite place. The smile faded from Serena's face instantly. She straightened her back, hiding all her emotions, and nodded slightly at him. Mr. Weston. Her voice was calm, distant, polite, like she was talking to a stranger. The light in Caleb's eyes dimmed visibly. Clara looked from Serena to Caleb, awkwardly rubbing her hands together. Serena. Grandma asked me to come help make tea. I'll go inside now. She ran back into the house like a scared rabbit. Serena and Caleb were alone at the gate. The evening wind carried the scent of grass from the fields, blowing a strand of hair across her face. She stepped aside and gestured for him to come in, her voice calm. Come in, please. He followed her silently, his steps hesitant, as if he was taking in this small country cottage that was so foreign to him. Inside, Grandma was sitting in a wicker chair shelling peas. When she saw Caleb, she just glanced up, never stopping her chopping. Caleb stood in front of her and bowed slightly, his voice tight with nervousness. Grandma. I'm sorry. I should have brought you to live with us these past years. I was negligent. Grandma dropped a shelled pea into the basket, not looking up. Mr. Weston. You're too kind. This old body isn't used to tall buildings and city life. That one Mr. Weston drew a clear line between them. Caleb's face paled even more. Serena said nothing. She turned and went into the kitchen, bringing out 2 cups of freshly brewed tea. It was Wild Mountain herbal tea, and when she poured the boiling water over it, a rough, clean scent filled the room. She pushed 1 cup toward him. Try some. It's just Wild Mountain herbal tea. Nothing fancy. He picked up the cup and took a sip, his brow relaxing slightly. It's very good. It has a unique flavor. He put down the cup and looked at her again, studying her closely. You look better than you did at the estate. As soon as the words left his mouth, Serena burst out laughing. Her laughter echoed through the quiet room, sounding strange and out of place. Caleb stared at her, completely bewildered. She finally stopped laughing and wiped the tears from her eyes, looking at him. Mr. Weston, you probably don't know this, but I never laughed like that once in the 4 years I lived with you. His Adam's apple bobbed. He took an elegant gift box out of the bag he'd brought and pushed it toward her. I bought this for you. It's getting cold. Serena didn't open it. She just glanced at the gold-embossed logo. A silk scarf, More of the same. She pushed the box back toward him, her voice cold. No, thank you, Mr. Weston. I've never cared about things like that. I wore those old clothes at the Weston estate not because I couldn't afford new ones, but because. She paused, meeting his confused eyes directly. I hated that putting on those clothes meant I had to be Mrs. Weston. Caleb's face froze completely. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but in the end he just said hoarsely, "The house. It's a mess without you. Mr. Carter's getting old. The new maids don't know what they're doing. And my mom. She misses you." He tried to paint a picture of a house that needed her to come save it. "Everyone says the house isn't the same without you." Serena listened quietly. "Is that so?" she asked softly, picking up her teacup and blowing on the floating leaves. "But I don't remember it being that way when I first moved in. The first time I hosted an afternoon tea party, I broke Elaine's favorite Limoges porcelain tea set. All the guests were whispering. And she looked like she could kill me." Her voice was soft, but every word was a knife twisting in his heart. "Where were you then?" "I was alone in the kitchen, staring at the broken pieces, when Mr. Carter snuck in to help me clean up and comfort me." "Where were you then?" "From that day on, I read every book I could find on tea etiquette, flower arranging, household management, even fine porcelain appraisal. I wasn't born knowing how to deal with wealthy socialites or run a house with dozens of staff." She looked up at him, her eyes like ice. "I learned the hard way, Caleb. I swallowed my pride and my tears, night after night, until I got it right." He turned his head away, avoiding her gaze, his jaw tight. The room was dead silent. She stood up slowly and walked to the door, pulling it open. The pear tree in the yard rustled in the evening wind. "You've finished your tea. The divorce agreement says it all. We're even. Please leave. Mr. Weston." She'd thought that her decisiveness that day would be enough to make him give up. But Caleb didn't give up. After that, he showed up at the cottage gate every Saturday afternoon, without fail. He never knocked, never spoke. He just left small gifts on the stone steps and walked away. Sometimes it was imported low-sugar cookies for Grandma. Sometimes it was the latest legal journals, with interesting cases marked in pencil in the margins. Serena looked at those things and felt nothing but irony. So he was capable of being thoughtful. He just hadn't bothered to be thoughtful to her for 4 years. Until one day, he brought a large, hardcover book of 19th-century American watercolor paintings. Serena was sitting in the yard, painting the newly blooming hollyhocks, when he spoke from the other side of the fence. He'd been standing there watching her for a long time. "What do you think of John James Audubon's American Goldfinch?" His voice was warm, like an old friend discussing art. Serena's brush paused. She was surprised. "The colors are rich and elegant, but the technique is too precise. It lacks soul." "So you prefer Winslow Homer's wild, natural style?" She looked up and met his eyes. In the sunlight, the hard edge of the district attorney was gone, and there was genuine curiosity in his eyes. She found herself talking to him for a while, about John Singer Sargent's watercolor technique, about Rembrandt's sketchbooks. She had to admit, putting aside their messy history, he was an excellent conversationalist, intelligent, well-read, with interesting insights. For a moment, she felt that rare thrill of talking to someone who was on her level. Perhaps that brief moment of harmony gave him false hope. He was silent for a moment, then finally spoke, his voice thick with suppressed pleading. "Serena, give me another chance. Come home with me, please." That word home sounded harsh coming from his mouth. She put down her brush, and that tiny spark of appreciation she'd felt vanished completely. She didn't get angry. She just looked at him calmly. "Come with me." She turned and pushed open the door to the old storage shed in the corner of the yard. The smell of turpentine and ink hit her immediately. Inside, it was no longer a cluttered storage space. Sunlight streamed through the skylight, illuminating rows of easels and paintings. Paintings covered the walls and the floor. Crashing waves, windswept country roads, the glowing lights of the city at night. Caleb stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide with shock. Caleb, this is why I can't go back to that house. The Weston estate is huge, but there wasn't a single room where I could set up an easel. The cards you gave me could buy any expensive jewelry or dress, but they couldn't buy me a single afternoon to draw in peace. He opened his mouth as if to defend himself. She didn't give him the chance. Do you remember our wedding night? His body went rigid, his face turning deathly pale. I was terrified, she said flatly, as if talking about someone else. I was shaking all over, but you just looked at me coldly, then went to the study and shut the door. When you were out of state on a case for 3 months, I asked if I could come with you. I wanted a change of scenery. You said, what would you do there? Pour me tea. Those moments that had once broken her heart now didn't hurt at all when she said them out loud. Just numb. It's all in the past. I don't blame you anymore. I don't hate you. She walked over to the window and looked out at all her paintings. I just realized I'm not made for that kind of life. The wealth, the rule sit suffocates me. She pointed to a painting she'd just finished, of a rainbow after a storm. Look at my paintings. They're not just about pear trees anymore. Her world was so big now. How could she ever go back to that tiny cage where she had to watch every breath she took? Caleb stood in the middle of the studio, surrounded by her art and her words. Like a lost child, all the color drained from his face, and for the first time, those always calm eyes looked broken and helpless. That confrontation in the studio seemed to finally break him. For a month, Caleb didn't show up. Moss started to grow back on the stone steps at the cottage gate. Serena's life returned to a peace she'd never known before. The early summer rain fell softly all day, washing the flowers in the yard until they were bright and green. She didn't have to paint crashing waves anymore. She painted rain drumming on broad hosta leaves, and sparrows taking shelter under the eaves. When her heart was at peace, the world she painted was gentle too. Clara came in from outside, shaking the rain off her umbrella, and said casually, Serena, I heard from Liam the driver that the Weston house is a mess. Mrs. Weston fired Maggie the cook. Serena was mixing green paint, and she just hummed softly in response. Those people in that life were a million miles away now. They couldn't touch her anymore. But that peace was short-lived. Through the rain, a familiar black car pulled up to the gate without warning. The door opened, and Caleb got out, holding a black umbrella. Serena's heart sank, and she was about to turn back inside when he walked around to the back seat and opened the door. A figure stumbled out of the car. He was thin, almost gaunt, swimming in an oversized coat. Caleb helped him walk, his head down, his steps unsteady. Serena's heart started beating wildly for no reason. Through the rain, she couldn't see his face clearly, but there was something painfully familiar about his silhouette. When they got closer, he looked up. Her mind went completely blank. Time stood still. All she could see was that pale, gaunt face, so thin it was almost unrecognizable. It was her brother, Milo. Milo. Her lips trembled, and she could barely get the words out. Tears streamed down her face. She ran into the rain without a second thought, not caring about the mud, and threw her arms around him. He was so thin she could feel every rib through his shirt. Serena. Milo's voice was rough, like sandpaper. He wrapped his arms around her, his whole body shaking violently. She could feel hot tears falling onto her neck. She pulled him away from Caleb and led him into the house. Grandma, who'd been reading the newspaper in the living room, looked up. Her smile froze when she saw Milo. Milo. My sweet boy. Milo's eyes filled with tears. He gave a deep, reverent 90-degree bow. Grandma, I'm so sorry. The newspaper slipped from Grandma's hands. She tried to stand, but her body swayed, and she collapsed backward. Grandma. Serena and Milo screamed at the same time. The entire afternoon was filled with chaos and grief. After the doctor left, and Grandma and Milo were both asleep, exhausted, Serena finally had a moment to breathe. She walked out of the bedroom and saw Caleb still standing there. He hadn't come inside. He was standing under the eaves of the studio, looking quietly at all the paintings. The rain dripped softly, making everything seem quiet. She walked over to him, composed herself, and bowed deeply and sincerely. Thank you. That bow was for her brother, who'd suffered so much, and for their broken family. He stepped aside, as if he didn't deserve her thanks. His voice thick with suppressed anger. Serena, you don't have to thank me. She stood up straight and looked at him calmly. Mr. Weston, we're divorced now. We owe each other nothing. But you deserve this thank you. I didn't help you so you could keep score, he finally snapped. Stepping forward, his eyes filled with emotions she couldn't read. She stepped back automatically, putting distance between them. That movement seemed to hurt him deeply. He laughed bitterly, his voice tired and rough. Do you think I did this just to make up for how I treated you? He paused, looking out through the rain at the distant hills. When my father was in that car accident, your father risked his life to save him. The Westons owe the Hales a debt we can never repay. She turned and walked into the studio, pulling a bank card out of the drawer. It had all the money she'd made from selling her first painting. She held the thin card out to him. Take this. I know it's not enough. Not enough to pay you back for helping Milo. Not enough for all the expenses these past 4 years. But it's a start. I'll keep drawing, keep making money, and I'll pay you back every cent. Her voice was calm, like she was stating a simple fact. Caleb stared at that card like it was a poisonous snake. He didn't take it. The air was thick with dangerous silence. Even the rain seemed to fall softer. Suddenly, he laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. Pay me back. He looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot, all his suppressed emotions erupting like a volcano. Serena, is everything between us just a balance sheet to you? I was a fool. I was blind. I had a pearl in the palm of my hand and I thought it was a worthless stone. He stepped forward, his hot fingers wrapping around her wrist. The bank card slipped from her hand and clattered onto the wet stone steps. I love you. The 3 words hung in the air, desperate and burning. His eyes were fixed on her, like he was willing to burn everything down for her. Serena, let's start over, please. His voice softened, almost begging. We'll move out of the estate. Buy a house with a yard. I'll build you a glass studio facing south. You can draw all day, every day, until the sun goes down. If you want to travel the world and paint, I'll go with you. We'll go to Norway to see the northern lights, to the Sahara to paint the desert. We can have the baby we lost. The future he painted was a beautiful oil painting, every brushstroke touching the softest part of her heart. It was a dream so warm it almost didn't feel real. Her heart beat wildly, and for a split second, she almost said yes. Then her eyes drifted past his shoulder, to the unfinished painting in the studio. It was a bird, breaking free from tangled vines, flying toward an endless sky. The sight doused her momentary softness like cold water. She gently pulled her wrist free. Caleb, she said, meeting his hopeful eyes. That sounds beautiful. It really does. But status comes with responsibilities. Being Mrs. Weston was a heavy chain around my neck. I'm selfish. I don't want to learn flower arranging to please anyone, or wear uncomfortable heels for parties, or spend all my time on housework and social obligations. I want to be a free bird. His face paled with every word. The light in his eyes slowly died. She looked at him and said the words she'd been holding back. I can't. Time stood still. The last light in his eyes went out completely. He let go of her, his shoulders slumping like a tree that had been cut down. He said nothing more. He just looked at her one last time, then turned and walked back into the rain. The black car drove away silently, disappearing down the country road. Serena stood there, looking down at the bank card lying wet on the stone steps. After that rain, Caleb never came back. A month later, the last rain of autumn fell, and Grandma collapsed. She was calm, and so was Serena. They both knew she'd been holding on until Serena and Milo were safe. Caleb came anyway. He didn't mention anything between them. He just brought a renowned holistic doctor from Boston. After examining her, The doctor told Serena Grandma had at most 2 months left. She thanked him quietly and saw them to the door. After that, Caleb came every day, bringing herbs and tonics, a silent presence in the yard. He sat on the porch, never coming inside, only stepping forward when Serena needed help. She tried to send him away, but he just shook his head and stayed. So she let him. In November, the last autumn rain tapped against the windows. That afternoon, Grandma, who'd been sleeping for days, woke up suddenly, more alert than she'd been in months. She even sat up on her own and put on her robe, her cloudy eyes clear. "Caleb, come here." Caleb hurried into the room and sat on the small stool beside the bed, leaning close. "Grandma," he said, his voice rough. Grandma's thin, trembling hand rested on his, patting it gently. "You're a good boy. Thank you for being here these past weeks. I know you are." Her eyes drifted to Serena, filled with love and guilt. "If it hadn't been for my old body failing me, I never would have let Serena marry into your family. She's always carried the world on her shoulders. She traded her art, her future, so I could live a few more years." Every word was a knife twisting in Caleb's heart. His tall frame hunched over, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably. "Grandma," she said, her eyes kind and all-seeing, "I know what happened between you two. You were meant to meet, but not meant to be. She'll never get over what happened. And you'll never make up for it. You're like tangled thread. You can't undo it. And if you pull too hard, it'll just break. Let her go. And let yourself go too." Grandma's voice was soft, like the rain outside, washing away all false hope. Caleb buried his face in his hands. A hot tear slipped through his fingers and fell onto the old wooden floor, leaving a dark stain. Quiet, broken sobs filled the small room. Grandma looked away. Out the window, the pear tree in the yard had lost all its leaves, its bare branches swaying in the rain. "It's a shame. I won't be here to see it bloom next spring." Grandma's funeral was small, just a handful of close neighbors and family friends. When it was all over, Serena packed her last suitcase. Milo carried it to the door without a word. Before she left for the airport, she met Caleb one last time at a cafe downtown. When she arrived, he was already there, sitting by the window. He was wearing the dark blue suit, the first and only suit she'd ever tailored by hand. The fabric was crisp, the cut perfect, making him look broad-shouldered and tall. But his once bright face was etched with exhaustion. He picked up the coffee pot and poured her a cup, his movements so familiar it was like they were still married. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice dry. "Portland," she said, meeting his eyes. "My comic studio is there. Everything's ready." A comic artist. He whispered it to himself, as if mocking his own ignorance. "I was such a fool. I thought it was just childish doodles. I was so wrong." She picked up her coffee cup, feeling the warmth in her palms, and looked at him calmly. "It's all in the past, Caleb." His shoulders slumped, and the last light in his eyes went out. "It was never about who was right or wrong. We just weren't right for each other. You wanted a wife who would take care of everything, so you never had to worry about home. And all I ever wanted was a paintbrush and a desk where I could draw in peace." He was silent for a long time, until the coffee had gone cold. A golden cage is still a cage for a bird that wants to fly. He finally looked up, his eyes red, but a small, peaceful smile on his face. He raised his coffee cup to her. "Serena, I'll drink this to you. May you fly high and free. Forever." She raised her cup and clinked it gently against his from across the table. "And may you find everything you're looking for. Be happy." She finished her coffee, stood up, and grabbed her coat. Milo was waiting for her by the door. She didn't look back. When she stepped outside, the cold winter wind hit her face, but she felt lighter than she had in years. She looked up at the gray sky. A flock of geese flew overhead, flying south in a perfect V.